nervous. I think you're the first person that I've talked to who has a Wikipedia entry.
Wow. That was not easy to do. I did not
Oh,
do,
really?
oh my God, Wikipedia used to be such a joke, and now they scrutinize every article and an adjective you use, and we had to resubmit it. Anyway, yeah, it's a very light Wikipedia, but
It was good. It's a great entry.
Anyway, yeah, thank you.
So, would you please introduce yourself?
Of course. I was going to resist the urge to be sarcastic, which is my nature. Yeah, I'm Chip Jacobs, and I'm the author of The Darkest Claire, a true story of murder, blackmail, and real estate greed in 1979 Los Angeles.
I read. I didn't have a lot of time, so I read the first chapter and the last chapter.
Okay.
And it was really good. Like you have a very colorful way of putting things, like a lot of metaphor, like almost poetic. It's very, and you said, we're going to get into this hopefully, but you were a journalist for a long time, weren't you?
I was, yes. I'm a recovering journalist.
Oh, I love that, recovery. Yeah. How do you feel like that contributed to your writing style? Like, do you think it did at all, or it's just like being a journalist?
That's a good question. I think being a journalist does teach you how to think, how to analyze situations, how to organize your thoughts. I don't know if it does as great a job, especially if you were a Metro reporter, investigative reporter like me. I don't know if it teaches you enough about the art of writing and creative nonfiction and characters and empathy and dialogue, those things. And when I left daily journalism, but I was still freelancing, it took me a long time to discover my voice. Because, when you work for a newspaper, especially the bigger papers back then, they wanted everybody to sound alike. Like it's this one organism all writing about different subjects. And I would be, when I really realized I was a writer trapped in a reporter's cocoon, is when I'd send my story in, goes to the copy editor's desk, goes up the chain, and then I would go whisper to the editor at the last one to say, hey, can you send it back to me? I don't like that lead. It could be a little more poetic. And I got to be very annoying that way. But it was, a little voice to me that I, had other things to conquer. But your voice is your voice. To me as a writer, this is the strongest roar you're ever going to have is whatever gifts you have behind the keyboard. I think you either can write or you can't. Yes, you can improve, but I don't know if you can take a good writer and make them to be, a remarkable one. I think there is some God-given ability, but, a lot of hard work and self-examination. So, yeah, my voice is my voice. I just come off writing a novel after, and so I didn't want to write a flat true crime book, and so many true crime books do read like procedurals.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of focus on blood and guts and police investigations, but to me, the why is always, to me, the most important word. The most important question. Yeah. What, where, and when are just handmaidens. So I'm just obsessed with why. And if I'm going to write about somebody who's a victim of a terrible incident, I want to humanize them because they're a human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love that about so long ago. Evil in the Garden of, or no, what was it? Something
Yeah, good and evil, and I know what you're saying.
It was one of the books that you recommended, and that's one of my favorite books. It's so
good and bad. Yeah, for sure. And I like In Cold Blood was one of the first to do more new journalism, Tom Wolfe style reporting. Mm-hmm. And others flowered from there. I really only like true crime books that kind of examine and indict a city or a culture or a way about doing things. I don't like ones that are just, and this happened and that happened and then there was arrest and the trial, just a sequence. Those just don't do anything for me.
I noticed that I was looking at your books on Amazon. You've put out a lot of books, which is wonderful. I noticed that maybe broadly speaking, environmental issues could be a theme there.
Yeah. When I was a journalist, I covered the environment. It was starting to become a beat of its own instead of a sideline. And I grew up in the smoggy foothills of Pasadena. And so and I always wondered about smog, and it would literally make mountains disappear. And people, little kids that were perfectly healthy, all of a sudden had asthma during a bad smog attack. This is the mid 70s. And so when I got to be a journalist, of course, I just wanted to go exercise my childhood respiratory demons.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I wrote about those things, and they're still very central to me. But now I'm really focused on fiction going forward. I
Mm-hmm.
will do nonfiction when the mood strikes, but I feel like fiction is what I was meant to do, and I had to be a journalist and write a million stories, meet a million personalities, and I draw from every one of those.
Mm-hmm.
So I still believe the best story is the one you never set out to write. And all my
I
really
like
big
that.
stories, the ones I put big hopes on, of it sometimes would not flop. They sure wouldn't create the story I wanted. And then other times when I would be looking into story A, I would hear somebody say under their breath, "Did you know about story B?" And then that I had my next investigation or curiosity to explore. So I feel that way. You just have to really have your ears open and not just be so focused on your notebook in front of you.
What do you think about that advice that a writer should that like, it takes about 10,000 hours or a million words to become competent? What do you think of that?
I think it's absolutely true. I know exactly what you're talking about Malcolm Gladwell's premise, right? And as a Beatle maniac, people remember the Beatles hitting Ed Sullivan, but did you know they were together? They were together longer before Ed Sullivan than they were after that show, and they rocketed
Oh,
success.
I
They
didn't
spent
know
like
that.
10,000 hours, playing clubs, driving in vans, all packed together, sometimes sandwiched on top of each other because it was so friggin' cold in northern England. Um, Going to Germany, you know, um, famous quarterbacks. Yes, you do have to spend many, many hours, 10,000 at least, a million words. I probably have written a million words. That's really funny you've said that. Absolutely. You know, if you don't come at it, write your heart at it, write your heart out, fail, flop, take some time away from your manuscript. It kind of weeds out.
Mhm.
The dedication weeds out the posers from those that just can't stop. And I'm pathological. I can't stop. This is
Yeah,
what
exactly. You can't help yourself. So,
honestly, I really can't. I believe in reincarnation. I think my next life I'm going to be a writer, and maybe by then I'll have read 10 million words or written 10 million. But it is for sure true. You know, the more I think like the more you write, the more experience you have, and the more confidence you gain, the stories come out more full bodied than if you were inexperienced and just trying to go for shock and awe and throw a pretty sentence on the page. There is a truth about that. You have to get to the point in especially like in a novel, I believe, where your character so well, they're telling you what to type. You're not making them move on the page. This true crime story that we're talking about today, I started working on based on a comment from somebody in 1998. And this is my kind of second book on the subject, but it took me that long to really understand the motives, could see the people interacting, almost like you could see a movie of it in your head. But it was a very hard one, that, insight.
right. Yeah, what you said about the Beatles, there's this, it takes 10 years of practice to be an overnight success.
That's really true.
Yeah.
That's true. And think about some people that just have natural God-giving ability, and they get on a talent show or they get a big book deal. Yeah, they'll do well, but they're going to be a flash in the pan if they haven't put in the hard work. And then they got lucky their first time out, and now they're going to be resentful. They have to work for their second sophomore success.
Right. So that brings up my next question, which is, when did you start writing?
When I was really little, I came from a kind of a strange childhood where I had two older brothers that were already out of the house. My
Okay.
parents had me when they're in their mid 40s, and I had a lot of time on my own, just myself, my beagle, and my imagination. And I used to love. I was an early reader. I loved the Three Musketeers. I loved um, Tom Sawyer. That might have been my favorite book. I had the biggest crush on Becky. You know, that might have been my first crush as a little kid. And I probably started writing like ideas and stories when I was about 6 or 7. Um, we lived in this country area, and I decided the horse in the property adjacent to us was a villain, like an international supervillain. And I named him Doctor Evil. No, all excuse to Austin Powers. And I decided to do espionage on this horse to see what diabolical things he was doing. And I created a story around Doctor Evil the horse, who actually stood around most of the time staring into space.
As most evil villains do.
Of course, they don't want to let on to their plans, dude. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of writers, I'm finding, like, I've done a few of these interviews, and a lot of writers do tend to start young. I find not always, but a lot of times. When did you learn how to read? Because I'm thinking it must have been before you started writing.
My mom, God bless her soul, doing well in the sky above. She was for very because other things had not gone as well as she'd liked in her life. She really retreated into books, and I always saw her with a cigarette in one hand and a novel in the other. And I remember her like on hot summer nights in July in the mid 70s. She'd be out on her lanai smoking and reading. And I think I just kind of copied her, you know, and it did infuse in me a really love of writing or love of reading and going and transporting myself. And so, you know, the Lord of the Rings trilogy was one of the first that I read. My parents gave me an Encyclopedia Britannica. There used to be, before Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Britannica. And
How old were you?
What did you say?
How old were you when you read Lord of the Rings?
Like maybe 11 or something, 10 or 11.
Pardon?
Maybe 10 or 11.
Oh, okay, right. Because I was thinking if you were like 4, I was gonna like be seriously envious.
No, I wasn't that way. But I remember the first book I really fell in love with is The Red Badge of Courage. Uh-huh. And then you know, later in high school, my favorite books became Lord of the Flies, Catcher in the Rye, which I recently just reread. But yeah, you know, it's amazing what the example of a parent can do to you. And books it's just like free entertainment, I found. And I would read through the whole night. You know, if a book has really captivated me, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm just going, okay, I'm going to go sleep.
Yeah, same here.
On page 275, I have to know. So that's when you know that's when you know you have an unnatural interest in storytelling, you know. And I would much rather read a book than watch TV. You know, TV doesn't leave any intrigue. Books do. Sometimes that's the worst part about seeing a movie, because you don't want to see what that hero looked like, because you've already developed them and fleshed them in your mind. So I had a pretty active imagination, and it does help, and being curious helps. I at one point said I'm going to read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica, right? And I got through like page 7 of the age. That's a lot of fine print.
So you're human, in other words.
I am, but I did give it a go. But that's a tough one. Yeah.
Do you remember how you learned how to read? Was it Sesame Street or?
I don't fully remember. I remember, you know, sounding out words. I remember them teaching you the building blocks, the proteins of sentences, basically. You know, you have your subject, your predicate, your object, those. Yeah, you know, I think like in 2nd, 3rd grade, I was an early reader. what my middle brother was special needs.
Mm.
He was 12 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was like 4, my mother was giving me Dr. Seuss books, things like that. I love
Right.
Dr. Seuss. Sorry, I just thought.
Yeah, me too.
Dr. Seuss was, my guru. And my middle brother Peter struggled to even write his name, and
Mm.
he would go to a word and go dog, and it kind of made me like, no, that's dog. What's the story? And it actually, I think I actually was showing him how to read.
Mm-hmm.
And it also made me start wondering what's going on with my brother. And then I started asking myself, well, if he can't read the word dog and he doesn't have a driver's license and he's old and he shaves, so that started spinning my mind about the real world, I'll
Right.
say. So yeah, I did. I think my father was a very brilliant mathematician type of a person. Went to
Oh,
Cal.
nice.
He could almost beat my calculator.
Oh, really? Wow.
He was not a reader at all. I just had. I would later find out, and this really influenced my decision to be a writer, not just a reporter. On my mom's side of the family, it was full of dancers, Hollywood composers, musicians, screenwriters, those types of things. That I just think it actually is in your DNA. I honestly do. And I think we carry a lot more in our bloodstream than we realize. And that, when I started learning more about that, that got me so excited. Like, you mean I can be part of this whole family? And a distant relative is Irving Stone, and the Van Gogh biographer. And it started making me think I was part of something bigger. And I got very enthusiastic about that and started learning more about that side of the family. Yeah, so I mean, it's what I think is funny and sad is I've been to many. I try to support my fellow authors, and I go to book signings, and some pretty big names are out there, and you would think their mother was shoving broccoli down their throat. They look so uncomfortable to be there and so unhappy and miserable. And it's like, oh my God, you've convinced 24 people to come, hear you sell them a product where they're going to invest 8 or 9 hours of their lives. I mean, I think it's such an honor to be able to get people to do that. It's almost like, wait, are you really here for me or the next guy up? And I mean, I have even more of a joy of writing. And when you read somebody that just makes you want to be better, that to me is the coolest thing. I'm one of my favorite authors is Philip Roth. Yeah. So I'm just blazing through his catalog. I'm learning stuff about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her writings. She was not only somebody who came up with the stages of death and grief, right? She had near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. I feel like those are some of the areas I was supposed to be writing about once I reached this phase of my life. So I'm trying to become sort of more aware of signals of where I'm supposed to go instead of just using my vanity, or what somebody whispers in my ear. If that makes sense. I really, I want the last book of this life to be my best.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good, admirable goal. If I could ask you, what made you decide to go into journalism when you were in, let's say, when did you make that decision? Was it when you were in high school or was it earlier?
I'll tell you, I think looking back, I knew I was going to be a writer my senior year in high school when writing, history, psychology, all the humanities came super easy to me. But because of my dad, when I would get into calculus or trigonometry, physics less, I started getting the yips. And where I would normally get A's, these formulas on the page would make me get into a cold sweat. And so I did have a teacher, an English teacher, we're debating Hamlet. And we would, I just love Shakespeare and that book and the themes. And she pulled me aside and said, this is what you should be doing. Mm-hmm. And I went to USC, University of Southern California, as a business major. And perfectly unsuited for this. I got in under that program, and I just wrote about this, a massive fight with my father when I told him, nope, I'm getting out of business. I don't want to work. He had a real estate company. I don't want to work in real estate. I find that though it has helped me, feathered my nest and gave me privilege, I would go insane working in an office. I want to be annoying and ask questions and learn new things. And we had a massive fight, but I knew I was establishing my identity. So I'd say I knew I wanted to be this is what I was meant to do when I was about 16 or 17.
Wow. Did you ever have regret?
How old were you when you realized it?
My mom always read to me. Like, I think this was a great gift that she gave me. And she was constantly reading to me. I suspect she read to me while I was still in her womb. And so I grew up always going, Mom, could you read me a story? And that was the refrain all day. I was an only child. And she spent so much time reading to me, but she couldn't spend all her time reading to me. And that's what I wanted. That was my goal. So my mom taught me how to read. She set up a chalkboard. And she taught me how to read it. She was like, okay, now you go read. You can read. And then it was like, Mom, what does this word mean? And I'd spell it out and she'd tell me. And she'd like, Karen, we have dictionaries for a reason.
I'm not your walking.
And I think it was just natural, like, because I loved reading so much that I would want to. And my dad told me a bedtime story every night before I went to bed, like just impromptu about his life.
Yeah.
So I think it was natural that I would want to start telling him stories and writing stories and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. What a gift they gave, be able to, because life sends you through all types of seas. And sometimes a book is the only thing that will float.
I think so. Actually, what do you think our culture would be like without stories, without novels, without that? Do you think that we would have a culture, that we would have civilization? Like, how important do you think stories are to us as humans?
I think we'd have I think there'd be a lot more authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And I think there would be a lot less joy, because telling stories is from the time the caveman I don't know if it's the right, caveman couldn't speak, but
sure. People who lived in caves, cave people.
I mean, stories began around a campfire, and then eventually they migrated to parchment, and then Gutenberg, right, and presses. I think it would be a really dark existence. And where would all that imagination in you, where would that go? And I bet it'd be a lot more violence. And I've actually been thinking, what happens if we live in such a technological society where even robots and AI can write news stories and write novels and all that? I think that will be the end of man, end of people. Because that's what makes us different. Not only our awareness of our own existence, but our ability to create and project and imagine. Animals can't do that. So if AI takes the place of the things that make us unique, then what's the point?
Right. Well, this is one thing I've been thinking about lately, is what role has story and perhaps myth served in our development as a species, and our development, living in societies, living in groups, and is there any sort of connection between story and ethics?
Oh, for sure. I'm the question of what is history is very interesting. And I live in Pasadena, California, which is famous for the Rose Parade, the Rose Bowl, JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab, Caltech, museums, fabulous architecture, all these glorious features of a marquee small town whose ambitions are known around the globe. And a lot of it is self-created mythology. Part of it is just not true. And when I wrote my novel about this spooky bridge called the Colorado Street Bridge, and looked at a more shadow history of Pasadena, the real history, by digging in as only, journalists, I think, could do, and reading obscure journals. I saw that the city relied on not a lie, but exaggerated tales and whitewashed accidents and self-aggrandized individuals to create a history that now is looking pretty paper thin. And I think the United States is the same way. I mean, I grew up in the era where John Wayne always beat the Native Americans. In World War II, it was always the tough GI taking on the evil. And now we're learning a lot of those things were manufactured and sort of brainwashed us. And I do think there's a reckoning that we're coming to on this particular point. When you use too much myth, eventually it all falls. And there's people that have been burned by being disenfranchised or being excluded from that story. And that's the case here in Pasadena, and it's a beautiful town. So yeah, I mean, it's we have. What will they say about history in 2090, about 2021, right? One thing I've noticed that really bothers me about the arc of history is folks that will try to go back 50 years to see, was that person woke? Gosh, in the 1940s, somebody referred to a woman as a dame, right? Oh,
as they did.
I mean, but what are people going to? What are they going to say? A couple generations downstream, you were on Facebook, you were supporting a data stealer. So yeah, I mean, history is all in the eye of those in the present. Yeah, I feel kind of like not angry at my teachers, but a little. I mean, I wish I would have actually had more of a Noam Chomsky. I don't know if somebody that doctrinaire, but it would have said, question everything. And
yes.
I saw a great bumper sticker back when there were things called bumper stickers that said, if you're not cynical, you're not paying attention.
I like that. Yes.
Also, there's another great one that said no comment. That was my favorite. But yeah, so words, stories, telling the truth, striving. I mean, anything that happens is a bit like a piece of diamond, where it's got all these different angles of refraction, and how you see the world is just a function of which particular slice you're peering through. And I think
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, please.
Do you think that it's possible I mean, I agree with you, like how you put that. I agree with you 100%. Do you think it's possible, and perhaps this is one of the things that story can help us with, that to take another's perspective?
I do. I think for sure. I wish there were actual shoes. Remember Dorothy, the Wizard of Oz? It's too bad those ruby slippers can't be transported to today. But instead of taking you to a land of munchkins and flying green monkeys, which actually scared the daylights out of me as a child, because those are very realistic.
They were scary.
Hell yeah. And like, where do they go for vacation? But they were scary. But I don't know. I don't know. It's a tough question to answer.
It would be nice if they could take us into the world of another person.
They were, and there's been creative works about that. But and there was actually an amazing Twilight Zone where there was a racist, closed-minded, awful person. And all of a sudden he closed his eyes, and now he's in Nazi Germany. He's a Jew with an insignia in his arm. He's trying to escape.
Yeah, the Twilight Zone was great. It was a great show.
But I think empathy I don't think you could be a really good writer unless you have empathy. Doesn't mean you have to have sympathy, but you have to have empathy all the time. It's really true. I would rather have a higher empathic IQ than, data IQ or analytical. Right. It is the key to success. And I think the best writers are the ones that just have all their senses working, and they can almost see pain in people. There was an excellent True Detective with Matthew McConaughey where
I watched that series.
I'm sorry.
I watched the True Detective. Well, the first 2 seasons.
Yeah, it got, yeah, exactly. But there was, I mean, one, I think he was with Woody Harrelson and they were in New Orleans, and he could go through a town and feel the pain radiating out of different houses. Almost like he had a case of like minor stigmata. I think that's the best. And actually in this book I wrote, I try to be as empathic as possible, even for people that I just thought were really slimy and double crossing and murderous. And a monster isn't born that way. They're born with dreams and hopes and insecurities and confusions and moms and dads. And what turned them that way? Why are they are? And you have to just take every single person and not make them, criminal B. They have to be human.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the person in the bad guy in the story I'm writing about, his name was Howard Garrett, and he was a kind of a two-legged reptile. He hid behind the veneer of his contractor's license to kill, intimidate, bully, extort. He got away with more homicides than the police could pin on him. But I really wanted to know who he was as a person and where he turned bad. And I think in the mid-'70s, as America struggled, Howard realized, oh my God, I'm seeing more people of different color and different ethnicities. And there's more Jewish people here. And there's more immigrants. And there's more folks that don't look like me, blue eyes, blonde hair. And that fueled in him a terrible hate. And that's what took him from a troublemaking, disturbed person that otherwise would have lived, somewhat normally, into someone that was willing to do the most awful, awful things and deprive children of their fathers just so he can make a point. So there, the inflection point, you always have to find, I think, using empathy.
That's pretty tough, empathizing with unlikable, like hateful characters.
But you have to.
Yeah.
You have to. And you also have to have a critical eye of the heroes in your story. I mean, are there really any heroes? I just think they're all anti-heroes, because everybody is flawed.
Well, do you think that a hero, but a hero is somebody, like in my mind, a hero is somebody who is flawed and who horrible things happen to, but who somehow is transformed from what they are. Like they're sort of thrown down into the pit, into the dark place, and they struggle up from that, and despite their weaknesses, they accomplish.
True. Yes, and some of the same character defects or shortcomings that they've lived with until that terrible incident is probably partly the reason they got into it.
Exactly.
In the case of my story, the anti-hero is a guy named Jerry, and he was young and nerdy.
Yeah, just introduce, like, tell people about your.
So in The Darkest Clear, it's really a story of three men. One was Jerry Snyderman, who was this 27-year-old, brilliant, nerdy, somewhat gullible space planner, interior architect, not interior designer, but someone that focused on creating schematics for commercial buildings and other properties. Because he looked so youthful, he was the youngest man in his own flourishing company. He enlisted an older colleague who was much more handsome, debonair, good with girls, would impress clients by being able to sketch upside down. He was a terribly troubled person, bipolar, with a lot of secrets. And I think Jerry in some ways knew this man is more mysterious than I realized, but maybe I can save him. And plus he's going to help my company thrive. So there was an element of avarice in wanting to take a shortcut there. They hired sight unseen on one job, on one reference, our friend Howard, who, unbeknownst to them, this is before Google and Facebook, the white pages, he was off on his own recognizance on a murder out in San Bernardino County when he came in to apply for this job in in a hip part of LA.
Wow.
By the way, in a few months, I'm going to need to go out and testify in a trial as a witness. He didn't say he was the defendant facing, maybe life imprisonment. And the reason that they brought him in is because Jerry's partner, Richard Kasparov, he wanted to go from designing to actually doing suite construction, home remodeling. Californians had passed this property tax slashing initiative called Prop 13. And they just saw money. And
What year was this?
This is 1978, 1979. LA was a very angry, random, high murder place. And Jerry did not realize he was playing with fire because both men stabbed him in the back. But only one was a murderer who would later start a murder for hire ring targeting real estate executives. So that became about my book. That's the basis of the book. And a terrible rainy night execution happens. Jerry finds himself on the run, stashing his family in the Midwest, wearing a disguise, having to have private eyes protect him, having a former Israeli mercenary be his muscle. It does feel like the Coen brothers, or somebody said in a review, an Elmore Leonard novel, all because he didn't have the caution to go, you know what, I would rather be the hare, tortoise in the hare, or I would rather be the tortoise than the hare, and just take my time and build. But he was partners with a hare that said, we can make $1 million. So it's a cautionary story. And like all the 7 deadly vices, that came into play here. And sometimes it's better to be more suspicious than to say yes at the first great idea.
That's really, actually, that's something. This is sort of off the top of my head, but how important do you think it is that, like, it sounds as though your book has a strong theme, has a strong message, so in other words, be careful who you partner with.
Correct.
Be careful, or maybe more generally, be careful who you trust.
True.
Do all of your books have strong themes, do you find?
I hope so. I sure hope so. My book about the LA smog crisis, in many ways, it is about selfishness. Selfishness by people that think they can own a car that's going to poison the air, but then they also demand clean air, right? Selfishness by car makers that think they can just produce engines that come and cough up dirty stuff, and people die of cancer or emphysema, like my mom, develop asthma, and yet they can be beloved icon of America. My book, Arroyo, was about realizing life is like a training ground. And if you fail, you're going to come back again, and you're probably going to be in a lesser status to achieve what the stars want you to achieve, about destiny. So yeah, I do think so. This book is about greed, but The Darkest Clear is about greed, but it is also about redemption. And Jerry survives the incident, but in a way, he was dead. The old him was dead, because he made so many mistakes. He had, for 2 or 3 months, he had the worst type of people after him. It actually gave him type 1 diabetes. It sent his life into a tailspin, lost his first wife, love of his life, lost his house, so many things. And many people associated with this story had to get therapy because it was so shocking. A guy being murdered through a plate glass window, having his back of his head blown against the wall, right? And there was a woman there when it happened. She went through years of therapy. Jerry refused to do it, and I believe that the ghosts of Jerry's 2 treacherous partners, one much worse than the other, it was contagious, and it got inside of his cells, and I think it haunted him into the grave. He, when I met him as a reporter, he was a golden goose source. 16 years had passed, but he later transitioned from being a crazy activist into trying to be this kind of benefactor, patriarch figure, trying to help people that thought they were beyond help. And inside, I think he thought that about himself, that he, was he asking himself whether he was worth saving.
So he's kind of looking for redemption in a way, maybe.
absolutely, he was definitely looking for redemption. He for sure was. And, in the end, he should have lived longer, but, maybe accomplished what he had. He outfoxed, the type of person that was able to trick police, get away with killing, intimidate dozens of others, and not face consequences. And, a nerd beat a monster. How many times do you hear that happen? It is true. Jerry he was a fat, chubby, picked on kid,
Mm-hmm.
and from a strange childhood where he was lucky his house didn't explode in this terrible plane crash.
Right.
He never knew what was real versus what was surreal, and he used that because of that confusion. He actually created something called the opposite test, where he'd use deductive logic to go. His mother was a germaphobe. This is true. It said, if you go and use utensils at a restaurant, you're going to get cancer or get some terrible disease. Well, Jerry went to restaurants and he seemed okay. And so he just flipped that logic. All of a sudden, now he has a man come into the office and said, I had your partner killed and you're next unless you cough up money.
Wow. Yeah, that's.
But as somebody that, Jerry lived a very sheltered life, even though he had a lot of self-motivation, sheltered life, and you have somebody like this telling you that, and, you didn't hear about executions of business people. And
No.
so, this was something out of a Los Angeles that almost only would seem to exist in an Elmore Leonard book, maybe a Joseph Wamba. And, sometimes reality is a little too intense. And that's what I realized here. And not just for Jerry. I mean, so many people were afraid of Howard. And he drove a steel blue El Camino. And that car was bad news. If that car rounded your block, it was a good time to get into your safe room, get out your gun, lock your get your deadbolt right. All those things. And one person had dozens under his thumb just by the idea of personal terrorism. So it was this was more of a drama than a quote unquote true crime story. And when I would go interview folks for this book, even 20, 25 years later, people were still crying, still shaking. One source, it took me a year and a half to get her to meet me face to face. Year and a half for one meeting at a restaurant. She thought maybe the ghost of the bad guy would come back up, or she was, going to create some negative juju. Folks were terrified of even having a plate glass window, honestly, where they'd open up their curtains, because this is how the victim was killed. It was a fishbowl effect, where the killers were outside the lit window. They could see perfectly well, but the victim, looking out against that glare, thus the name of this book, couldn't see anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, the more you talk about like your real life experiences with this story, the more it seems, wow, this was like the perfect story to write about. But you want to say, and of course it didn't, but you want to say, oh, it must have almost written itself in the sense of just the events that happened, because they're so larger than life, which isn't at all to take away from you the skill and the commitment and everything that it took to write it. But how did you, I guess there's two questions here. Like, how did you pick this particular story to write? Because you were a journalist for a long time, and I'm sure you came across a lot of stories. And my second question would be, have you ever come across a story that was absolutely amazing, but it was so quirky that people would never believe it? So it was an amazing story, but it's the sort of thing maybe you tell around your friends around a campfire, but if you wrote it down, people actually just wouldn't believe it.
That's okay. These are very intertwined answers. I think stories come to you. I don't think there's any accidents, and I know that is the most hackneyed concept. Oh God, it's so crunchy, it's so new agey, and I do believe everything happens for a reason, and this is a story I could not get away from, because I mean, walking down Hollywood Boulevard. And I've said this before, back in the late 90s, walking down Hollywood Boulevard was like being Luke in the Star Wars bar. There was some strange people there with, many of them walking briskly to places for where there was no appointment. And he stopped me and said, "Did you know I have a double murder chasing me?" And it was like, "Oh, come on, you're yanking my chain, you're BSing, trying to show you're cool. Can't you just be happy letting me know great stories, ideas, investigative subjects?" And that began my pursuit of the story. He had a very, like we're talking about a diamond in a prism. He had only one little shade of refraction understanding of what happened. Like he was looking through a keyhole. And so my job was to go and bust that friggin' door down. And some people lied to me. Some people didn't want anything to do with this story because it was so traumatizing. Somebody had gone down to the Hall of Records and poached or conveniently taken away a lot of documents that might have been incriminating to them, including big time names in Los Angeles history that were tangentially involved. And I just got obsessed with it. And it's like, I started realizing there was not only a murder for hire ring going on, but they were the most incompetent criminals that you could ever imagine. It took, people, it's funny and it's also tragic. It took them almost 10 times to get this job done. One hitman decided he didn't want to be part of it after he blew a piece of metal into his eye, sawing off a shotgun. And now he is the subject of an execution attempt. And he came within a hair's breadth of having his brains blown out in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. He later tried to do the right thing. Lifetime criminal had more conscience than some lawyers with statutory duties to stop a crime before it happens. It was mind-boggling. This is the story that I've had trouble getting people to believe happened. Boy, that was hard for me to say. It was hard for me to get people to realize, no, this occurred. This was Los Angeles. Some of the worst things happened blocks away from where I grew up. And actually it made it difficult for me to get a book deal because people didn't believe it, and, but it's true. It's happened. I have the records. I have the depositions. Let me send it to you. Honestly, when you read the whole book, I would love you to email me and tell me whether you think it sounds more like fiction and than nonfiction. And so it was combined in the same thing. And I just couldn't, not write about it. And then I wanted to write something different. So I followed up and I tried to follow the characters after the trial was over, especially Jerry. And he had a very, very colorful life. And I started realizing something about activists. A lot of the times they show up at a cause for things that have nothing to do with that particular subject. They had some other traumatizing, damaging experience in their life, and they want to make a difference here. That was the case with Jerry. Jerry was the most entertaining and annoying and creative activist Los Angeles had ever seen, honestly. And when the laughs were over, the questions began, like, why are you doing this? He was a wealthy developer. Usually don't see a wealthy developer trying to get under the skin of local politicians. You usually see them trying to curry the favor of local politicians. So that's when I knew this story was different. But it was really hard to make people accept the idea. There are assassinations in Los Angeles. There are murder for hires that go on. That case the police can't solve and say it sounded like a drug deal gone bad. No, it was probably, somebody paid $10,000 to get rid of somebody else. And my interest, I'm very interested in 1978, 1979. I see so many parallels of angry white men then and angry white men now. And the commonality is they think the system stabbed them in the back. I, as a 17-year-old, when this happened, high school student, I became the victim in a road rage incident before there was even called road rage, where I briefly swerved into a man's lane. I started off the book in the prologue about this.
Yeah, that was very good.
But this was the moment I did not think I was going to live to my 18th birthday. I had this angry kind of Vietnam War era burnout in a rusty VW bus whose tailpipe sounded like it had mechanical emphysema. I swear to you, he chased me because I briefly swerved into his lane. He rolled down his window at the first intersection when we were parallel and said, like, kind of like, roll down your window. It's like, okay, I'm going to get in trouble, or it's going to tell me my tire is low. And he goes, I'm going to get you, MFer. And this guy kept his word. He stalked me onto a cul-de-sac, which I thought was actually a bypass street. I did not know it was a dead end, and he blocked our way. And for about 5 minutes, this guy just had rage coming out of his temples.
Yeah.
And he stuck his head into the window of the car and shook his fist. And I thought, on the other hand, was a gun or a knife. And I thought I was going to be on the 5 o'clock news. If it bleeds, it leads, that type of thing. And it did get my mind going about what is going on. This is not the America that they've taught us in our history books. The America that, of D-Day and the Civil War and the Founding Fathers. This was an America of a lot of furious people. And the movie Network captured it perfectly. I'm mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. I really wish everybody would go back and read that screenplay, because it captures the essence of today, of a more hollow pursuit of liberty. And I feel very fortunate this guy did not murder me and my buddy. When I wrote this book, I channeled that thought into it, of that zeitgeist.
And it really came through. Your emotions in that moment, I think they really came through, and that was part of what made that scene so good. Because I mean, at parts you made it kind of funny, and I was laughing, and but I think the horror, like, what did you call him, Stork Man?
The Stork Man, absolutely. He was, yeah. It seemed like almost like a extraterrestrial movie where the alien can just in one stride be up to you, and that's what it felt like with him. But he did remind me of Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He did. I mean, he didn't have a mohawk. He had long hair, but just that type of disturbed individual. And 1979 was it was so bad. America needed a reason to celebrate, and when the United States beat the Russians in the 1980 Olympics, miracle on ice. I mean, we were in such low spirits and so lacking confidence and so demoralized. We needed that to remind us we're the United States of America. And that was all around. This was the age of 3 Mile Island meltdown. This was the age when the Ayatollah Khomeini said, "Death to America." The Soviets invaded Afghanistan. There had been energy rationing. People were upset with Jimmy Carter. Remember the Malaise speech? And we were sort of down. We were sort of like the Kinks. The Kinks, one of my favorite bands, wrote a great song, Superman, about we'd always helped you. Who's going to lift us back up? That is true. But what's interesting about this story is that Jerry's company was doing so well, despite all of this gloom and doom, highest murder rate in local history, in local records, and yet his firm is doing well. But eventually, you can't outrun your times, and he got sucked into it.
No, that's true. One thing I want to ask you is like something you sort of emotion. Like, you're obviously very passionate about these themes, and you're connected to Los Angeles, and you're connected to this story in various ways. And I really felt like that I could feel the emotion coming through your words when I was reading your book. And I was wondering, and one thing that I like to ask people about is, well, this is not going to pertain so much to this particular nonfiction story, because you actually met some of the people, and you're actually writing about real people that in many of the cases you met. So obviously you have someone in mind when you're writing. But you mentioned that you've written a fiction. Do you have a title for that one?
Yeah, it came out right before the pandemic hit. It was called Arroyo.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was not a single person. I mean, I'm effectively the protagonist. He has a lot
of course, every writer is effectively the protagonist.
His name is Nick Chance, but there's a lot of Chip in Nick. Actually, Nick has a lot of qualities I wish I had, but there was not a single person in that book I did not draw from my personal experience.
Okay, yeah.
The narrator was based on two people: a well-known tea shop owner in town and my own father. The romantic interest of his was based on several women I've known in my life. The grandmother was based on my grandmother. One of the bad guys I just took from somebody I went to grad school with, who I always thought was a terrible sociopath, and I was going to read about him being, having, leading police to where he's buried the bodies, right? So you don't, you're not making them up whole cloth, but you are taking a little piece of real cloth and expanding and changing and diluting.
Right, of course.
Yes, I don't know how anybody else can do it. I find for me, when I wrote my novel, and I'm going to do this for my next book, just pick visual, really get your mind going. And if you look through like a book of old postcards, my book takes place in 1913 Pasadena, and then 80 years later, 1993. Well, I was around in 1993, so I didn't have to recreate as much. But just looking back at old postcards on YouTube, where there's a Charlie Chaplin movie or a write up this old railway called the Mount Low Railway, those things really put you in that spirit. And
Yeah.
Eventually, fiction is tough because you're not only telling a story, but you're creating a world.
Exactly.
Nonfiction is much easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's the artful placement of facts and action, but fiction is much more challenging. And I really encourage people just to get a book about the era, a coffee table book about the era, and just thumb through that and just let your characters, materialize there. And what would they do? And what did there was this beautiful gardens called Busch Gardens that was created by Adolphus Busch, creator of Budweiser. And if you just look at those pictures, and you can just start to see your characters walking a trail or passing a fountain or angering a swan, like that happened.
Yeah.
In the story. Swans can actually be quite nasty, as I've learned. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of visual orientation that you can do to get yourself in that right mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So and today with the internet, there's no excuse for not being able to do flash research on subjects. There's really, we've overcome information gap that used to plague other writers. So, I do, it always helps if you transport yourself into a world you're trying to create.
Yes, yeah, I think that's really good advice. When you just when you were talking about like your process, I was wondering, and you're mentioning research, which is definitely so important. But how do you do it? Like when you write a rough draft, how complete is it? Like I know some people, myself, like we do a vomit draft. That's what I call it, a vomit draft, and you just sort of scribble and write down your ideas, and then it's like you organize. So I mean, first of all, would you say you were more of a pantser or a plotter, if you know what I mean by that?
I was just going to say, and then, but the real name it's called the vomit draft is when you come back and read it, you want to vomit.
But, there we go. I like that. I'm stealing it.
But you do have to be, somebody told me this, and I've told other people, you do have to be super happy with yourself that you completed a SHIT novel. I mean, it's a draft. It's going to be as imperfect as a messy lump of clay that you molded after, some drinks or whatever. But you're beginning the process.
Right.
For nonfiction, probably 3 or 4 drafts, I feel like I'm in pretty good shape. With my novel, it took me 8 drafts. My dad died during the middle of it, so that derailed me. But it just takes it's there. I think with every idea, the perfected version of it is there. It's your tenacity to get there and be willing to throw out a draft and go, I'm going to have to climb that mountain again. Because every time you go through, if you write 100,000 words, that's a steep hill to go back up, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to be properly nourished and have oxygen and water. It can be very exhausting. You just have to be committed to doing multiple drafts and feeling like the subject enough where you're not winging it. Writing is no place to fake it till you make it. So right. every book I write, I try to read at least 20 books first. Do I read every page, every footnote? No, I don't. The thing about being a novelist is if you just have a surface understanding of the big names and events, but a very concrete appreciation of what you want to write, that's good enough. So, I read books about the Bushes. Upton Sinclair was a hero of mine. before Woodward and Bernstein. And I loved his story, and I just blazed through his novel or his biography. And that really does help, because when you read about a side character in a book, you're also informing yourself about that era, controversies, topics, how people spoke, the price of gasoline or whatever. So, there's no substitute for researching, but it takes a lot of guts to be a writer, because it's very much like creating a child and then being willing to release that child into the world for them to criticize, analyze, and blame the parents on.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
But would you, okay, so I really, I think I understand what you're saying. Like, in order to really sort of have an idea for the story, you need to know a little bit about what you're talking about first. So read about the era, read about like the particular place, like get, how did people talk, this sort of thing. But if you're but I've heard some people say, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this. And I know it's sort of getting on. I don't want to keep you too long.
No, I love it.
Okay, good.
I'm going to seriously ask me to every question. I know, I like it.
Good. Okay. So I've heard the advice that don't worry too much about doing research on your first draft or maybe even your second, because you don't know what you're going to cut yet. And so you could do a lot of research and it's just going to end up like under your bed somewhere. Oh, maybe I'll use this one day, So do you have any advice for me and for other writers about that, like that sort of tightrope to walk? Like, when would you say to really like dig in?
That's a good question. Because I had done all my research for Arroyo before I started my endless drafts, and I wasn't really reading new books. For me, I like to have done all my earlier work first, and then form my characters and my plot after that. But I could see the value of doing that. I mean, for a nonfiction book, I would not do that. I mean, I have court records. I interviewed a couple dozen people. I have police material. I have business documents, business plans, et cetera, et cetera. You have to know what you have on a true crime book before you start going in. For a novel, I could almost see, you doing that approach, having your basic research, knowing the times, knowing the boundaries of the universe you're forming, and then, writing your first draft. And the best book I've read, bar none, on writing is Stephen King's book.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm one of the problems of being an author, independent author. There's so much noise out there, and I wish I could cut off my ability to go on to Amazon, go on to the New York Times, and there actually are programs, because that's all getting in the way between you and your story. And so I'm trying to learn to block that out. I think, that's probably not a bad idea to have some just basic level of understanding in a fiction book. And then, if you're writing about Nazi Germany, let's say, and you don't need to know everything about the Luftwaffe to write an effective story is about a colonel in there. Right. Maybe you'll go back and read it later. And Stephen King's On Writing says the best thing to do, and it's true, get your first draft out of the way and then let 5 or 6 weeks go back and come back. And then you'll see the book the way it really is, not the way you've idealized it. And it's true, and it's hard. And it's almost a great chance to go write a short story.
And that's what he does, right?
Yeah, it's almost like clearing your cache. And so I'm going to start working on my next book. I mean, he says there should be no reason you can't. I mean, Stephen King I don't think he's human at this point.
No. Or he made a deal with the devil, one or the other.
He did. And in this book, he had this terrible car accident where it like twisted him around so badly, you're surprised he didn't break into two. And then he recovered from that. He'd written his first book, sometimes so intoxicated on coke and liquor. He wrote best-selling movie-made books when and all those brain cells are gone. He says he should be able to do a book in 3 to 4 months, put it away and redo it. I'm going to actually follow his advice more. Turn off the TV, turn off that internet. It's actually tougher these days to be a writer. That, when J.R. Tolkien was writing his books, it took a long time to get mail. There was no telephones. I don't know if he indulged in any of the pharmaceuticals like his contemporaries, but this tended to be the reason why books were so big, because this was entertainment. This was he was Netflix, you know,
Yeah.
and we have to get back to that. It's very easy to have your peripheral vision become your main vision. And so I have felt that too. It's a very competitive industry, the writing industry. Don't you think? It almost makes you, with Amazon, look over your shoulder. How's that person doing? How's this? And that's betraying your own talent.
I think it's a fine balance. I mean, I was talking to one of my, think of them as my authors now, the people that I've interviewed. But I was talking to one girl about this, and I mean, I think we both agreed that we'd been ludicrously fortunate on Twitter. We've met a lot of beautiful, wonderful writers who have inspired us, and hopefully, like, maybe through something we've said or done, we've inspired other people. And I think that sometimes, like, I know this is going to sound maybe a little bit, woo woo, or, but I think sometimes the energy that you put out there comes back to you.
There's no doubt about that. Yeah, for sure. The more you help people, the more human you become, the more human you become, the better writer you are. Although there's some really wonderful writers, and then you meet them in person, and you don't know how they produce the beauty in their words, because it's like, wow. There's other people that are just terrific people and have written terrific books, and they don't get any run. It's you can't you really
it's mystery. Yeah.
You cannot invest at all in the outcome, but all you can do is just love the process. I mean, that's one of the best things about writing, is writing a sentence only you could write. In the history of the world, only you could have had that thought.
And that's the secret of voice, right? I mean, that's when you found your voice.
I think so. I feel like this is what I was meant to do, and I would not want to do anything else. I would not want to be in a cubicle. And I want to inspire people, and I wrote my novel in an escapist way. I mean, it's a historical novel, but there is sarcasm in it, tongue-in-cheek comments. There's a little magical realism, but I wanted to write something inspiring and thought-provoking. We were in a dark, dark time. Mm-hmm. This is before the pandemic hit. Yeah. What a wonderful, honor to be able to get somebody who's down in the dumps. Maybe they're looking at their last months in this world, and you're going to get 9 hours of their time. That's so precious.
Yes, it is.
And I really do take that seriously. And so I don't, like I said, I don't understand people when they go to a book signing, they're moping.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I could see myself being like completely terrified. Okay. I think that would be more on the cards for me.
But that means you care. That means you care. That's great. But yeah, we all write for different reasons. And the next book I write is going to be the most, my novel is going to be the most autobiographical, and not going to be as whimsical as my historical novel. I don't know if I'm going to do another true crime book. True crime books, those are hardy souls, because they are going into the worst moment of people's lives and picking through them in granular detail, and going and knocking on doors and saying, hey, so what was it like when your brother got stabbed 47 times and thrown into an alley? I'm too much of a wuss as a human being. I cry at a sappy commercial. And putting this book out when I've already written about it, I had a lot of second doubts about, should I put people through that? Because Richard, the victim in the story, he's got daughters. They're grown up now. They don't want to, relive all that, even though they were too small at the time to know what was happening. So when I went back and did it, I tried to more empathize with Richard, even though he backstabbed Jerry in this partnership. But I did try to understand his psychology more, appreciate as a human being, and put myself into his shoes. I mean, I know people that have bipolar syndrome, and it's very easy for us to judge, but it makes you actually, bipolar doesn't make you more likely to commit a crime. It makes you more likely to be a victim of it. And so I did try to bring that in, in all things, be a human being.
Actually, you brought up something. I'm relatively new. I like talking to people, as you might imagine,
Good at
but
it.
I'm relatively new to interviewing. So I guess I have two questions for you. One, I mean, I'd really be interested in. I mean, like you were saying, some of your interviews must have been very like difficult because there was that woman who wouldn't talk to you for a year and a half.
Yeah.
I can imagine that wasn't an easy interview to go into because you don't want to cause any harm, but you also don't want to make her skittish. You want her to open up to you, and and I guess I would that would be I would be interested in like what do you have any tips like for people that are doing interviews? Like it's all my interviews so far have been so great. I mean, people
Yeah.
have wanted to talk to me. I haven't experienced anything like that.
I think the key to that's yes. I mean, this is where I did use some reporter skills because by the time I've written some of these books, I've interviewed thousands of people. Lord knows how many of them when I was a young reporter, when the other side of that receiver go, wrapping the phone cord around their neck, going to their friend, shoot me, or doing the flipping me off. But doing your research, being interested about people, asking your toughest question last. Um, I've really gotten into because 90% of communications is nonverbal,
Mm.
and reading nonverbal cues is essential. When you ask somebody a tough question, they give their answer. Pay attention to how they look in that second after they stop speaking. Do they put their head down? Do they rub their face?
Mm.
There was a really good Seinfeld. I love Seinfeld, and he does make a comment that's true. The more anxious the person, the higher up on their face they scratch or itch. Like, what do you have for breakfast today? Yeah, I had a burger. So how did did you cheat on your first wife? So
No.
pick up on those nonverbal cues and bounce off them. The other one, and this one was tough to learn when I was interviewing people that were crying or their hands were shaking, is when you ask a delicate question, don't fill in that pregnant pause. No matter how long it goes, don't fill it in. You're going to want to do it. It's like an itch. You're going to want to scratch it. Don't. Because people, good people especially, want to tell you what's bothering them and what's tormenting them and what they've never said. And it's almost like a test. Can you be patient enough for them to tell you after a long pause? So that is critical. And the best things people have said is when I bit my lip and shut my big mouth and just let them tell you what they want to tell you inside, subconsciously.
Good advice. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I guess we're getting to the tough questions.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, this one just sort of came to mind as we were talking. And one thing I've been thinking of lately is the difference between propaganda and good stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's one mark of propaganda is that it's not usually they aren't very good stories. And I think maybe one reason is that propaganda is more to do with ideology, where a good story is more to do with, I don't know, life experience. You're honestly groping your way, dealing with the difficult issues of life in a messy way that may not make too much sense a lot of the time. So, and I was wondering, like, we talk about genre literature and or genre fiction and literary fiction, and I've been trying to like think of that dichotomy and think of it in terms of like what is I mean sometimes we have the feeling that one book is just not very good, like The Eye of Argon. I don't know if you've ever run across that, but I mean there are books that are objectively not that great.
Yeah.
And there are books that are absolutely wonderful, like I love Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. I love, you know, C.S. Lewis's stuff. You know, these are good books. And I was wondering, like, what role do you think and we were talking before about the environment and environmental crisis and stories that people spin about things and justifications, and what role do you think propaganda has in storytelling or in bad storytelling?
That's a good question. As somebody that was very interested in the old Soviet Union, so much of their literature was either propaganda or anti-propaganda about. That's a tough. I don't know. when you said propaganda, I included in The Darkest Glare.
Oh.
I don't think you read this. A story about the snake in the mailbox story, which I think you're probably too young to know about.
Oh no, I remember. I did read that. Yeah.
Right. And so, but
No, you said that to me. You said that to me. It's like the short story, and yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So it's not. This is deviating from your question, but the story is about the collapse of a cult built on propaganda. Um, and propaganda is never going to last. People eventually see through it. I've learned a lot about China, and the only literature they let out there is very propaganda centric. And it's like reinforcing the idea the state is God, the state knows all, the state cares more about you than a foreign power. And inevitably, people grow cynical and they laugh at it and they mock it, even though they may, be able to recite a line from it if their life depends on it. But in the story I wrote about this cult, it was led by a guy named Charles Diederich, and what began as a cold turkey detox for alcoholics and junkies became an alternative lifestyle regime. And then when people started asking questions, it became a cult. And cults usually do not end well. They usually end in things on fire, bullets being fired, murders, etc. And that's what happened here. And I really actually got very interested in how they divide and conquer. And there's incredible comparisons. I know we're getting a little different, but the name of this cult became a cult was called Synanon. And it was a very mainstream cult. This is in the 70s. And when I've read about QAnon and Synanon, oh goodness gracious, the overlap. Don't trust the media. Don't trust authorities. They're coming to get us. They're, if not for this conspiracy they're running, your life would be so much better. Synanon did not promote the idea of a ring of pedophile, blood drinking elitists running
pizza eating. Don't forget the pizza.
Don't forget the pizza. But they had a lot of similar ideas about kill the media. They're trying to ruin our good thing. We're the patriots. They're the apostates. And I can understand the role of propaganda and demagoguery, like Donald Trump promoted, is to provide simplistic nativist solutions to complex problems, because we do live in a screen full of gray pixels. That's just the nature of 2021. Propaganda is that, and the idea of creating fake news, false narratives, conspiracy theories, telling people if not for this, then you would have that. That is
right, simple,
a very dangerous trend.
Yeah, I mean, and as you were talking, I mean, it's a story, like if it's latching onto something that's true, is going to last, because it's going to resonate with people, and that's going to be part of the reason why it's loved by people. I think maybe that's why we have the myths that we do, that even though technically, they're false, there's something deeply true about them.
Yes, I mean there's the old quote, was it P.T. Barnum? There's a sucker born every day.
Yeah.
Well, but also isn't there a realist beneath that sucker? And there's something gone wrong in that sucker's life, where they've been groomed to believe a fairy tale, and I think that's a big problem. I wonder how all this division is going to affect literature going forward. Is it just going to be red books, blue books? Because I really hope not. I mean, when I was growing up, you didn't talk about politics or religion at the dinner table. You talked about sports. You talked about your dog or your troublemaking kid or whatever.
Or the neighbor's troublemaking kid.
Exactly. I was that kid. But where is, I'm actually really concerned about that. And I feel like the written word is under assault a bit. And you see that today in the book world. There's more books than ever. There's like 500, 600 books produced a day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that it's a very diluted field. Where does somebody go to read a book that's going to change their life? Especially if they don't trust the New York Times or a certain review site. So it's, even literature has become political, and that's a shame.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely.
Yeah. What's an example of like propaganda literature, though? I'm curious to ask you. Like, is there some book that you read promoting a certain point of view where you feel like it's really brainwashing?
Okay, I'm gonna just be completely unpopular and risky. But when I was a kid,
Yeah.
my parents were very religious,
Uh,
and some of the literature, especially for young adults, that was written it was Christian literature.
uh-huh.
And it was very self-consciously Christian literature, and it wasn't very good
Yeah.
because it was just pushing forward certain things about the faith that I don't know if the author completely believed. I mean, it wasn't more of an, I mean,
It was trying to
Christianity is a beautiful.
yeah, it was trying
Pardon?
to indoctrinate you.
Pardon? Yes, yeah. I mean,
Indoctrinate.
Christianity is a beautiful and deep religion, but in some books, it's more of an ideology.
Yes, I see. Yeah, yeah. But now you're a book writer yourself. You're interviewing authors. You've come out of that. You're more aware of that. Maybe, I mean, it makes you wonder about what other books out there right now aren't promoting Christianity, but they're just promoting extreme.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Or,
No, I mean that's what I think of. Like that, I've been thinking about that quite a lot lately. I don't know. I go on these.
you should. It's yeah. I mean, the well-educated person does not spend all their time on Fox, nor do they spend all their time on CNN. They should actually have their nose in some books and movies, and going to learn about something they never thought they'd want to learn. I
Yeah.
was my dad, who did not want me to be a writer, only really read about cosmology and astrophysics, that type of thing. His grandkids, my daughters, had just read Animal Farm.
Oh yeah, yeah. I read that for school. It's a
Right.
good book.
But yeah, and it's really about anti-communism, right?
Yeah.
Beautifully done. And my oldest daughter was trying to explain to my dad, that's the theme of the book, because he said, well, what books are you reading? And so my dad goes, so wait, was the pig named Ivan? Because he was convinced it was about Russia. No, the pig was not named Ivan. And he kept going through Russian names. And it was like an engineer, how an engineer looks at literature, very literally, And we, as writers, we love metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
We like similes. We like parables. For me, I find the joy in irony and paradox. And
Yeah.
the bridge I write about in my book, Arroyo, is the most, go Google Colorado Street Bridge, because it curves and the look of it, it is the most haunting, eye-catching, mesmerizing structure you'll have ever seen. And it's also, and people from all over the world come to look at it. And when it was built in 1913, it was setting all types of records, but it also has an alter ego as Suicide Bridge. That's what I knew it as a kid. More than 150 people have died. So it's a paradox of both light and dark. That to me is fascinating.
Yeah, I think,
like
yeah. Yeah, that's the combination that you want, I think.
Yeah. And, in this story about Jerry in The Darkest Glare, he's light and dark. He started off as an innocent little boy in North Hollywood, California, who just had immense drawing ability, artistic ability, and he got exposed to dark. And he never fully exercised or removed that dark from him. Maybe because he didn't want to take a look back into his past. He was afraid about how much he was culpable, which he wasn't at all, but maybe felt responsible, didn't want to look into his own painful childhood. There's a lot of people today that were afraid to look and to see who they were and why they became who they are. They would just rather vent and lash. And it's good to kind of ask about your own origin story.
I think so. That feels like a really good sort of. So I have two questions for you.
Please.
Okay, so the first one is, where can we find you on the web? Like, where can people reach you? Where can they buy your books? Like, I'll include the links in the description.
Sure. I have an Amazon page, Chip Jacobs, as well as a website, chipjacobs.com. And I was going to say something sarcastic about I'm living inside people's phones and et cetera, but yeah. So I'd say Amazon.com on my website, chipjacobs.com is the easiest way to find me. I do have Twitter's Chip Jacobs 1. I'm quite allergic to social media. I just think most of social media, outside of meeting good people like you, it's like a high school hallway, and people you think are your friends aren't really your friends, and people that you follow probably are doing things off Twitter that you wouldn't want to emulate.
Right.
But I nonetheless, as an author, you have to be on social media. It really is like, to me, eating vegetables about being. You have to do it, but it's sure damn unpleasant.
It's your broccoli.
It is. Oh God, that brings back some bad memories.
Yeah, I got the feeling you weren't a fan.
What do you say?
I got the feeling you weren't a fan of broccoli.
No, and I was also greatly dismayed as a child when I could not convince my dog that would sit under the table at dinner. She would not eat broccoli. She did everything else I didn't want to eat. So I'd have to create elaborate, of course, very obvious excuses. Oh, I have to go to the bathroom, and then, broccoli down the toilet. So anyway, yeah.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so my last question.
Let's leave that impression down. Move away from that. Sorry for putting that scene.
Oh, no, that's fine. So my last question is, if you could go back and talk to your younger self, and if you could tell them one thing about writing, what would you tell him?
That you have a voice that people are going to appreciate once you have self-confidence in yourself. And don't let other people's negativity or toxic spirit prevent you from spreading joy and happiness in your writing, because that is our ultimate goal. There's more dark matter in the universe than any other element. I personally think dark matter is love, and that sounds so Beatlesy and all that, but I think that is our job, is trying to, bring a smile and happiness and a laugh and maybe a tear to people that need it. And there's an old saying in journalism, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I do believe that also takes place in writing. You want to challenge authority, and you want to support those disenfranchised. Jesus didn't say, come to aid the wealthy and the privileged, right? They're going to inherit the earth. So, I think I would tell myself, you have a reason for being here, and you don't have to feel like a wanderer trying to find your purpose. If you look inside, and you ask yourself what makes sense about what you were going to leave behind in this life, it will be okay. I used to think I couldn't, when I was like 7 or 8, I can't wait till I'm 15. I can't wait till I'm out of this house. I can't wait till I'm 21. And, you don't realize as a child, all the runway you have ahead of you, all the Saturdays you can blow, all the Sundays to think, all the chance to pick yourself up and dust off. All the failures are going to be subsumed by the successes. I wish I would have told myself, you have time. Calm down. Don't be upset. Because sometimes in a lonely child, and you felt the walls kind of can close in on you, and you only have a finite amount of time to be, what you're dreaming of on TV or in a book, when you want to emulate. So I would just tell myself, calm down. You have a place, and your voice is inside you. Just let it develop. That's what I would tell myself.
Great advice.
And also just follow through on those guitar lessons.
Do you play?
I do. There's such a connection between writers and musicians. And whenever I'm done with a book, I have so much extra creative juice in me. I have to go to my guitar and create my own little weird songs. The best song I ever wrote is after I wrote about China's environmental apocalypse. And I was so downcast after writing about cancer villages and east waste villages. And in China, you think the pandemic's bad? They lose 3,000 people a day. to air pollution. I went and wrote the most optimistic song you'd ever imagine. It's called Buck Up, and it is interesting, right? It's like energy can either be created or destroyed. What do you do with that surplus that's always been there when you're done, when you hit, the end is typed? I have to go to my guitar, and I'm not alone. And, that's Stephen. This is why Stephen King was in a band and the others. There's another outlet. Yeah. Do you play an instrument?
No, but it's been one of my life's ambitions to draw.
Yeah.
So I've been experimenting with that.
Good. It's probably, but I mean, it's, we don't have a choice. You just got to put it someplace. And so actually I'm going to start introducing some of my music online and being, I mean, if not,
put it on your website. I'm
gonna, I'm gonna, Instagram will let you do a minute of it. And, there are some really, I mean, I've met musicians that are excellent writers, but you can tell their first gift is really music, and they go the other way. They're done doing an album. They have to write a book. So there's something really cool about that, don't you think? And
I think there's something about art. I think it's like writing or drawing or creating music. It's a creative act.
Yes. All my favorite musicians, Paul McCartney, John Lennon, Ray Davies, many of them were in art school before they became musicians. And some of them were writing poetry at a very young age, and the teacher got very upset with them and slapped it down with a ruler. It just would take one teacher to go, I think there's something there with you. And I feel like I feel that way too. And they realized they shouldn't have been in art school. That wasn't what they were cut out for. But art school was their way to get to their true creative voice. But a lot of these famous musicians later go back and do art. Have you ever seen Jim Carrey's art?
Yes, I have.
Oh, the guy is incredibly talented.
He is.
Yeah. So it's all part of that same right-brained, power generator.
Mm-hmm. It's really great that more and more, I don't know if you ever listened to, I didn't listen to much of his music, but Alice Cooper.
Right. I do like Alice Cooper.
His guitarist, longtime guitarist, he has a podcast now on YouTube, and it's really interesting. And I don't know, for some reason when you were talking, it popped into my head. If you haven't listened to it, you might be really interested.
What's the name of the podcast? I for sure will listen to this.
I'll look it up, and I will I'll tweet it out. I'll DM you.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'll for sure listen to that. Yeah, I mean, I would love to do there was a game show called Hollywood Squares.
Yeah.
And C-list celebrities, some of them not totally sober, answering questions in a game show format. I would love to do that with authors after they've had maybe a drink.
Yeah, that would be great.
And they would have to can you pick out this song after 3 notes? Or can you identify this book from the opening sentence? Right? That, to me, that first sentence of that book has to be so killer.
I bet you I could do that with Stephen King. Maybe.
I think Stephen King, you to play a song and see if you can identify.
No, the opening sentence.
Oh, yeah. It's funny that Stephen King, I think there's so many jealous people out in the world. Stephen King is routinely criticized for not being a good writer. He is a sensational writer. He's not just a storyteller, and he abides by the rules of grammar like you would not believe. I mean, he is a bit on the warpath against adverbs.
I know.
Jimmy Carter was in office, and he's right. One of my problems is I'm so passionate, and I want to put.
That's not a problem, though. That's awesome.
Yeah, but sometimes you can run too high a gear, and I want. Somebody once said, write visually, and sometimes you can be a little breathless if you're doing that, and it takes a good editor to go. This is great, but sometimes less is more. There's a time to go 90 and there's a time to go 65. So I'm still learning this myself. But if you don't write descriptively, that to me isn't real writing, because you want to put people there.
Yes, I agree.
So stick figures can just stay on, 3rd grade third grade.
What I'm curious now that I'm sorry, I should let you go, but
Oh, no.
I'm curious about what you think of Hemingway. Do you like how does his work resonate with you? Because he was I mentioned that because of course he was a minimalist. He
He
was.
was. It's funny. I love Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah, me
I
too.
don't love his style, but yes, it was a good day. I mean that's I mean, okay, and nothing about the sunset or nothing about cigar smoke in the air. I love his writing because
Yeah.
and he's still able to tell a really gripping story. I'm a giant fan of Philip Roth, and Philip Roth does not have a lot of adjectives, but he packs a lot of description into his stories, and he you don't feel just transported into the pages. Sometimes you feel imprisoned by them.
Mm.
He just has a way of using the English language in a way that makes you see the mother he is absolutely deconstructing. And I aspire to get to there. That's the thing about being a writer. You always can be getting better and better and better. And I would rather stop now. If somebody says you've plateaued, no book is going to be better than the next, I would be devastated. I want to, you just have to want to get better. And there's only two ways to do it. Always be reading and always be writing.
Yes, I agree. That's an interesting phrase that you used. Imprisoned by the writing. You said something along those lines. But that's exactly how I felt when I was reading Misery by Stephen King.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's a great book. It's one, I think, in terms of the writing, it's one of his best written books. It's a beautiful book, but it's just so horrific. Like the acts of violence, of cruelty. I mean, I just wanted to close my eyes, and of course, you can't close your eyes and read at the same time. So, and I couldn't not read. So I felt like that I was imprisoned by the story.
I know. And then who was the actress in that?
Carrey, was it Carrey something here?
Kathy Bates.
Kathy Bates, that's right.
But you know what's funny is that after that movie, she did another terrific Stephen King movie called Dolores Claiborne.
Oh yeah. I don't know if I've seen.
And she's the heroine in that movie, so she goes from monster to heroine.
Mm.
Yeah.
Good for her. She's a great actress.
She is. I mean, I'm working. My next novel is going to partly involve a prep school and autobiographical, more or less. And I want people to know what those hallways smelled like, what the chip pole looked like. The bathrooms where I would have to go and run and hide from the bullies, and what it's like to eat a tuna fish sandwich next to a urine cake. And, I mean, I know that sounds gross. My job is to put people there like I'm transporting them in Star Trek. That is the thing about writing. I mean, there's no limit to what you can do. There's nobody that says you can't, once you know the rules of grammar, violate them and even create designs on a page with words. I want to be more experimental. I want to take more chances. And
yeah, go for it. I mean, because you really have that ability. Like, we all have holodecks between our ears, right? And you have that. We have the Next Generation, Star Trek: The Next Generation, a holodeck. I mean, that's how I think of it. We all have holodecks between our ears, and so you're sort of writing the story for the holodeck, and you're very good at it.
Well, yeah, thank you. I have a lot to improve on, and I noticed that when I was writing my books, my reading dropped off because I think my brain had trouble engaging. That was a mistake. You always have to be reading. It doesn't have to be a book. As a former reporter, I mean, I'm a news junkie. I subscribe to 5 papers online, blah, blah, blah. That's okay. But you got to make yourself see how other people approach descriptions, introductions, where they're, improving on things where you struggle. I mean, that is critical. Remember in the movie Glenn Ross?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was.
Yeah, but it's true. You always have to be reading.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to come and fake it, under the bestseller list or whatever. In this book about the darkest glare, I mean, I had to question myself. I had to ask myself, am I providing too much material? am I describing the murder scene too grisly or more tragically?
Right.
You just have to write descriptively. And if they can't see the action, the reader, how can I expect them to engage with the character? So I do believe that.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love it. I just, this is what I was meant to do. And, the keyboard, I will still say, is more powerful than a nuclear weapon.
Yeah. No, I believe that. Yeah, that was one of the first sayings my father taught me. The pen is more powerful than the sword.
It truly is. It truly is. And one of the worst vestiges of the Trump era is the media is the enemy of the people. And it just shows a galling lack of understanding about why the United States was formed. We were escaping not only religious persecution, but censorship. And it's a First Amendment for a reason. The founding fathers really made the press almost like the fourth branch of government, to be a watchdog. And, most reporters aren't going out, no reporters are going out there saying, I'm going to repeat what the Democratic Party want me to say in the talking points memo this morning. They're idealists. They're dreamers. We want to make a difference. We're worried about irrelevancy by going to work in some boring office job. That's why we're going out there with a pen and a paper, and talking to strangers every day. And so that I'm very happy to see that a lot of great papers have survived and flourished. The Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, those places stood up for democracy, and I couldn't be more proud of them. Even though I'm not a working journalist, man, those are the patriots.
Yeah. Well, on that note,
anyway,
thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you. I had a blast. I did not know what question was coming. I liked it. They were different. So yeah, sorry if I had a few brain vapor locks there. But
no.
You asked really insightful things, and I hope folks will check out your future interviews. I will make sure to tell other authors about you.
Thank you.
If they get some time, spend a little time with The Darkest Claire, Arroyo, and hopefully you'll come away inspired or with a healthy mistrust of open windows.
And be sure to let me know about your next book.
I will.
Okay.
All right.
Well, it was great. I mean, it's also really interesting to me that it seems like a lot of the authors that I've talked to used to be journalists.
Yeah. You have to develop your own voice, and you have to be confident in that voice. And I think for most journalists, if they weren't early readers of fiction, they can struggle. And I've seen that happen, where they have a good story, but they're lacking emotion. They don't have empathy, because journalism is about the who, what, when, where, and why.
Yeah.
It's not about somebody's subconscious. Not about somebody's, arc and their ability to overcome a false dawn. If that makes sense.
What do you think about that? What do you think about like the whole idea of the hero's journey? Like, do you think it's like a little hand waving, like idealist claptrap?
No, I don't. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like it, and there's this, a lot of folks say it's like the MFA school of teaching. There has to be an arc. The character has to be
right.
But I mean,
Master of Fine Arts, right?
Yes, right, exactly. But I don't know. There is a universal truth about it. I mean, do you really want to read about a character that hasn't changed at all?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, it is like a law of gravity. You can try to escape it, but in the end, it's going to apply. I mean, maybe. In my book Arroyo, there's 2 lives in it, and my character does not grow the way he's supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
In his first life, good-hearted that he was, and he's sent back again, and that's when we see his character change. And I felt that myself. Sometimes I've looked at myself and go, why haven't I achieved this next objective? It's because the journey didn't influence my growth.
Right.
So I felt very strongly about that. So yeah, you have to have a hero's journey. Doesn't mean, and the bad guys or the ones that don't succeed, maybe they're the ones that aren't changing or they're regressing. That's
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, I want to see a story where somebody is different in the end, even if it's in his dying breath. you know.
Right. And also the hero doesn't always succeed in the end. They can fail.
Yes, that's true. But there's some self-realization. I mean, I don't know if Jerry, I mean, when you read the whole book, I don't know if Jerry succeeded or failed, but he definitely was changed,
Hmm.
and tried to save other people when he considered himself, I think, inside unsavable. That to me is the most interesting part of him. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a great story.
yeah, thank you. It's been a journey.
Okay, well, until next time.